One of the biggest trends right now is gamification. We're seeing companies like Zynga, for example, incentivize their users to do particular tasks like introduce other friends. And they award for that virtual currency in the game. Now, obviously, that isn't very different from what supermarkets like Sainsbury's do, for example, in that they reward their customers, for example, for buying that chicken Kiev box and giving them twice the number of reward points. But the interesting thing is now that all of this can be data driven, and we're collecting a lot of data about the users and how they behave. And these gamification systems can now be applied to areas like publishing, for example, where you could incentivize readers to introduce other readers by, for example, having them unlock additional articles or publications. You can use it in education, but you can also use it for things like recycling. If you'd like to incentivize your citizens to recycle more, for example, or to consume less energy, you can award them points. And obviously all of these things are possible now that we have these kinds of devices, mobile devices, that allow you to check in or check what you've just recycled, etc. So it's a very exciting trend. One of the areas of incredibly high potential for tablets and phones is gaming. Whereas in the past we've only been able to reach the hardcore gamer, we can now reach a much larger number of users. People who actually didn't see themselves as gamers previously, because they have the devices on them and because it's so easy to purchase or download content on these devices. And thirdly, because we have a touchscreen interface that is much more intuitive than the usual keyboard and mouse or even joypad control input. Now, a similar thing is true for publishing. It's now possible to reach people maybe who didn't read newspapers in the past, or who didn't have time to read entire newspapers, but who we can now distribute to parts of a newspaper, or for example articles that on their own are interesting to the user, but where the entire newspaper wouldn't have been of interest. There is a major opportunity right now for content businesses to draw inspiration from the data-driven businesses of social gaming, for example. And what I mean by that is that there's now the possibility to distribute content to consumers in a way that previously wasn't possible, and to incentivize users to share that content in a way that previously wasn't possible. On the flip side, I think if you port your existing content, for example, of a magazine onto iPad, or even just create a rich media version of that content onto iPad, I don't think that really does the medium justice. Instead, I think a much cleverer way to use that medium is to create a version of that content that is quite lightweight in terms of its actual download size, but that can be shared very easily and that can be downloaded very easily. As an example, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to have a static layout for a magazine, for example, but in fact to just have layout algorithms that make it much easier to repurpose your existing content, because that allows you to use the back catalog, for example, that you have and repurpose that, but it also allows you to distribute without a huge amount of megabytes that need to be downloaded. Now, what that opens up in turn is that as a magazine publisher, I can now cross-sell one magazine or one subscription to another subscription. It also means that I can incentivize my user and saying, you seem to be liking this article, would you also like to read our article or our feature on Egypt from 2 years ago by comparison? Or you can tell the user or your reader, introduce another reader and get a subscription for free, or introduce another reader and get this whole range of articles on songs by Radiohead for free. So there are a whole lot of things that you can do that draw directly from distribution, the way distribution works in social media, and apply that directly to publishing. One company I think that knows how to use this kind of new approach is Flipboard. What they're able to do is repurpose existing articles that are currently on the web and put them into an auto laid out format on iPad to make it easily readable and easily navigatable. Now, if you imagine that kind of approach used, for example, by a specialist magazine publisher, they'd be able to repurpose their entire back catalog content, repackage their back catalog content, and be able to cross-sell and upsell it to other users. I think one of the areas of social media that is, in my mind, often misunderstood is how to use social media, in particular in a way that drives your sales and use it as a marketing channel. I think it's a completely missed opportunity to just use Twitter or Facebook in order to retweet certain articles or broadcast some news. I think where it's particularly important is if you can add social relevance to your articles. For example, if you let one of your readers recommend an article to a Facebook friend and send that article that usually might cost some money for free as a gift. That is an incredibly powerful way of introducing new readers to your publication and making them socially relevant. One of the really exciting opportunities right now is that we can make a lot of decisions on a data-driven basis, whether it's game design or marketing decisions we have to make. We have a lot of data to back that up. Very often it's even a matter of putting some of the data into an Excel spreadsheet and finding out whether a marketing method right now works and how we can improve that. Now, for example, we've found in our own games that incentivizing people by giving them a little bit of a virtual currency to do a particular thing, for example, rate your game, increases the likelihood of that by about an order of magnitude or 10 times. And that is an incredibly valuable piece of information for us internally because we can apply that across a lot of different methods and mechanisms. Obviously, media and gaming are areas that change very rapidly anyway, but the current period is probably one of the fastest change I've ever seen. And the reason we see that fast change is really, it's driven by two areas. It's one, a social graph, mainly driven by Facebook, and it's two, very high volume of highly integrated devices, mainly driven by Apple and the iPhone and iPad. Now, when those two are now coming together, it means that content can be socially relevant. I can introduce content to my friends and make it socially relevant that way. But at the same time, I now have ways of consuming and distributing that content on my devices like an iPhone and iPad that previously simply weren't there. Those things taken together are the perfect storm right now, and that's why we're seeing so much change at the moment.